Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr. Today, I'm joined by Paul Romig-Leavitt and Brian Davis from the Torn Curtain Arts team. Paul is president, worship leader, and worship coach, and he has been a worship pastor and creative director in Denver since 2001. He is a co-author with Greg Steer of the book Q Lines, Time to Act, and has written and directed plays that have been performed for over 500,000 people around the country. He loves helping churches and other companies overcome their creative obstacles. In fact, he was recently hired as creative director at Waterstone Church in Littleton, Colorado. He lives in Broomfield with his wife and 2 daughters. Brian Davis is the vice president at Torn Curtain Arts. He is also a worship leader and worship coach. He has been leading worship in the Denver metro area for the last 22 years and has built relationships with dozens of churches all over the city. Authenticity and empathy have been hallmarks of Brian's leadership, and his intention is to use these attributes to coach other worship leaders and inspire greater creativity and deeper spiritual practice in the local church. Brian has 3 daughters, and he and his wife Jess live in Lakewood, Colorado. He also serves part-time as the worship arts director at New Denver Church. All right, welcome to the show. My guests today are Paul Romig-Leavitt and Brian Davis of Torn Curtain Arts. This is your host, Lauren Richmond Jr., and welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you for having me back, Lauren.
Long-time listener, first-time guest.
Yes.
This is my first time being a guest on any podcast.
Wow.
That's not true.
It is true. Yeah. I just skipped all that and went straight to being a host.
You went, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
Yeah.
you know what they say, those who can't guest host.
is that what they say?
I can second
Somebody
that.
does.
Well, this is a fun first for me. It's my first actual in-person interview.
Oh.
Yeah.
Since,
Yeah.
ever?
Ever.
Oh.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So,
Well, we'll be gentle.
yeah, please do be gentle. And if things are a little crazier than normal, it's because of that. So,
That's all right.
not Brian. I'm getting you guys backwards. Paul has actually been on the show before.
Yeah.
So, listeners, if you go back to season 1, I have an interview with him and Justin Bullis. But Brian, since this is your first time ever as a guest,
Yeah.
would you share with our listeners kind of a little bit more about yourself, your faith journey?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm born and raised here in Colorado. One of those few natives, but I'm not snooty about it, so don't worry.
Yeah.
Born in a little town in the Northeast Plains, grew up in a Christian home. Always had this sense that I was going to be doing something with music and or ministry most of my life, and that was the road I took. Went to a small private Christian university in Lakewood, and got a music ministry degree. I've worked in churches pretty much ever since I moved to the Denver area. So 25 years I've been in paid professional ministry, doing music, leading worship, that's what I have been doing. What I do now, I work at New Denver Church in Denver, Colorado, and also work with Paul at Torn Curtain Arts. And that's so. I'm in the middle of telling my story.
It in post.
So I've been here I've been on staff here for 5 years, and did some freelance work with them before, ever since the church started. But I've worked at a variety of different churches in the Denver area, big churches, small churches, and that's kind of at least my work story. My faith journey, I gave my life to Christ. I'm doing air quotes with my
air
fingers.
quotes for our listeners.
I grew up, in in a Baptist church. And so that was what you did. Is you gave your life to Christ and you walked forward after a specific message. But I didn't follow all those rules. Like it was just a normal Sunday. It wasn't like we're going to give the gospel message type of Sunday. And it was after the sermon, they were doing the closing hymn, and I just started weeping. And I was 11 years old, had no idea why. My dad leaned over. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, I think I need Jesus.
Wow.
And so my dad took me up front. Of course, the pastor was completely bewildered. Like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, we didn't plan for this.
Right.
And, he asked me what was going on. I told him, like, I think I need Jesus. So I prayed the prayer right there up front, and they made the announcement, after the closing hymn, and was whisked away immediately after the service to the pastor's office so that we could make sure that it was really like, this is really what I was doing. And they gave me my first Bible and all that kind of stuff. And a few weeks later I was baptized. And then that summer we went to Disneyland. So I like to say, like, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. What are you going to do now? I'm going to Disneyland. So yeah, that was, ever since then, it's just kind of been, kind of growing up in a very, I don't want to say strict, but like it was a staunch, very evangelical Baptist tradition. But my parents were, they were both kind of mainline. My dad was Methodist growing up. My mom was Episcopalian. After they got married, they got caught up in the Jesus movement. And so there was this like undercurrent of like, of charismatic, faith and belief going through all of that. And then, we went to the Episcopal church for a while. Then we were at a Baptist church. My parents were part of a small group that did their like, kind of weird, crazy, charismatic thing, in people's homes. And, probably about once a quarter, we'd skip town and, go to a city that had a large, charismatic church or something like that. And so I had that exposure. Plus, all the Baptist stuff, a little bit of the Episcopal stuff. So I kind of, I'm sort of a religious mutt, I guess you could say. But I think now later on, I feel like each of those individual things really kind of informs my own faith and the way that I lead worship, the way that I look at just the church in general. And I feel like now, especially as I'm moving into my mid 40s, like I have a lot more compassion for the church in general, having seen both the best and the worst that all of those different traditions can provide. And then also, my working experience, working in a small church plant to working at, one of the largest and fastest growing churches in the country, then leaving that and going to another, large, fast growing church, and now working at New Denver, which is trying to find this, sort of this mix of evangelicalism and, more liturgical practices and kind of Anglican, more of an Anglican approach to how we worship. All of those things, it's like none of this is necessarily wrong. It's just all different. And so, at least from a work perspective, that's where I'm at personally. All of those experiences, plus a handful of other life experiences over the last decade, have all brought me to a place of like, okay, what is all this? What does all this mean? Why is, not necessarily why is this happening? And not even necessarily why, what am I supposed to be learning during all this? It's just a lot of like, just why, and what, what is going on. So you caught me on a good day. So I'm ready to talk about, church and ministry and the future of the church and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that, Brian.
Oh yeah.
I think, that's something perhaps similar, backgrounds, myself growing up Baptist, and I think about, you're mentioning like liturgy. You didn't use the word ritual, but certainly that's a thing in there. And many people who don't grow up Baptist or are not familiar with that tradition, like the going forward aspect in a service is perhaps a ritual. And again,
Oh, absolutely.
Someone from that tradition certainly wouldn't recognize it as such.
Yeah.
But it's a meaningful ritual.
Yeah.
And myself having a very similar, diverse working path. I joke I work now in 5 Christian traditions. I really appreciate the different aspects of each faith tradition. So it's awesome that you can bring that similar experience. Let me ask, to not leave Paul out here entirely. Paul, one question I've been asking folks who've been on the guest or who I've had on as guests before is, what's a spiritual practice that's maybe sustained you during these really rough years of COVID?
I would say the one that comes to the top of my mind is running. Running has been the way that, prayer has morphed in my life over, I grew up in the similar ways, kind of evangelical backgrounds. And so praying and prayers had a very sort of scripted and very, very clear sort of form. And contemplative prayer or anything like that wasn't something I didn't discover until much later in my life. But then I think it was when I turned 40, I started running. And it's been the thing that I'm not good at it still. I still struggle to do it. Like I was much better maybe last year and still struggle, but it's something that now I allow to sort of flow in and out a little bit like what I understand like meditation is. So, that, and that's probably the most consistent spiritual practice, and that has definitely helped quite a bit.
Yeah. Brian, how about you?
Yeah.
Similar question.
Yeah, similar answer. Contemplative prayer, more contemplative practices have been a big part of leading up to, but also during COVID. It was you didn't have that large group experience anymore. That that so many of us kind of cut our spiritual teeth on, and so once that's taken away, I was fortunate that I was exposed to a lot of those things at an early age, but also, like I said, in my role here at New Denver, that those were things that we were starting to engage with pre-COVID. And so it was sort of an easy thing when, I can't, we don't have these, I'm not going to the church. I'm not standing on stage and leading worship for people. Which, in some ways were kind of the only spiritual practices that I sometimes had. It was like, this is my role. This is my job.
Here a little bit.
And so I don't want to give anything away, but to make that, more of a personal practice. Things like, the examine, practice from Ignatius, that's become a big part of kind of how I spend those private times, and that sounded weird. That's how I spend those
private
times.
I like to spend my private times with Ignatius.
That's right.
He visits only on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
That's right. But that's been really helpful. But even leaning back into older prayers or like some of those scripted prayers or prayers that are written out. There's an app that I have on my computer called Universalis, which is it's a more kind of breaks down the year. It's a very kind of a daily, more Catholic approach to personal prayer and things like that. But sometimes when I'm feeling like God is far away, or I'm feeling like I can't quite conjure up the energy I need to say a prayer on my own, and just like off the top of my head, what am I going to pray to God? Like, is he even here right now? It's really nice to be able to lean on those prayers that are written out, or prayers that people have been saying for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and say like, okay, I'm going to say these words or I'm going to write down these words as an act of faith.
Yeah.
This is not
Yeah.
like, okay, God, here it goes. Whether you're here or not, I'm going to say these words. And it's not like, trying to conjure him up or conjure up some magical thing. It's just, okay, this is in front of me.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna do this as maybe even as an act of will.
Yeah.
And so, things like writing out, the prayer of confession from the Book of Common Prayer, or saying that out loud while I'm alone in my room or something like that. Like those have been really helpful and a way to help God and others who are also saying those prayers, around the world, that's a way to kind of reattach to that closeness that we missed out on during COVID.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like we could have just like another 15, 20-minute conversation on like just the way that many in the evangelical tradition are starting like what's the word? Like re-recognize
and discover,
become more aware of, rediscover like some of these deeper liturgical traditions, which I think is cool to see.
Yeah.
But for the sake of time, let's jump into the conversation. So I want to kind of introduce this as like, again, I come from, or I guess presently, certainly I, grew up Baptist, independent Baptist, very conservative, very traditional, work in mainline Protestant context, which again tends to be very kind of formal and liturgical and traditional. And then of course, being on Twitter, seeing kind of a lot of the ex-evangelical movements, which probably you guys are familiar with and our listeners are too. But I saw this kind of lately, and I've been reading some books around clergy burnout and clergy issues. And the biggest kind of like thing that I was kind of like unsure how to talk about it was one is like the idea of performing as a pastor. So like I was recently reading this blog by this ex-evangelical, and she was kind of lamenting kind of the worship scene, which I imagine you guys can relate to. Certainly like over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and more largely so in, evangelical worship spaces or church spaces. But this kind of idea that like, it's all production, the band is just performing, there's no authenticity to it. And I've wondered like what level of, because again, I think of myself as like a pastor, like when I'm up there speaking, like certainly there's some level of production or performance to what I'm doing. I'm trying to speak clearly, I'm working on my my pauses and the pregnant pause and, pronunciating well. So there's some measure of performance to it as well. But then we get into this issue of inauthenticity and is it all a show? So maybe first you guys can just talk about like, because you both have been in some pretty big spaces, I think, with some measure of performance expected. So why don't you guys first talk about, why don't you kick off, Paul, about kind of like dare to share and some of those things. And then Brian, you can share about your experience.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in several environments where I'm performing music or theater, but within the context of a Christian event.
Yeah.
And so because of the context, the type of performance is given a different kind of weight than if you were to just see it in a theater or if you would, or a school or something like that. And that's really because of how our brains are wired and tuned in to religion, into spirituality, and how those things are operating in the background. And so I wasn't aware of all those things when I was performing. I was a Christian kid who just loved Jesus, loved and knew I was a performer and just loved performing. But didn't realize the exchange that was happening. And so the exchange in terms of energy, the energetic exchange, that was, I feel like I was expending a kind of energy that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
And it went on for a long time. I've been in ministry for just about as long as Brian has, somewhere around the 22, 23 years of, and then as my faith is shifting and changing, and I'm starting to contend with seeing both the light and the dark side of that performance personality of me, then it really it starts to take a toll on relationships. It takes a toll on professionally, what I can do, what I can't do anymore. And it just, I don't think most people in ministry and pastors, they don't anticipate that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's thinking about those things.
I mean, quite literally, I'm back in the game, so to speak, after being out of working for a church for a year. And like my first realization, like after a Sunday, was like, holy cow, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is because your brain is firing emotion on these emotional cylinders that, and I might be talking too much about the brain a lot.
No,
I've
fine.
just been re-engaging with the
Nerd alert here.
with the research from Andrew Newberg. If you've read his book, How God Changes Your
Now
Brain,
he's name dropping.
yeah,
Oh, gosh.
but I highly recommend it. But it's fascinating when we talk about ritual, when we talk about the physicality that's involved in ritual, the rhythm that's involved in ritual, and the spiritual and emotional elements of ritual.
Yeah.
Like, they are ancient. They're as old as human beings, and those sort of things are active and involved in our brains. And I think when you begin to learn those things, when you begin to sort of like have a community that walks through those things, the awareness changes. And actually, I think that the level of stress, the level of wear and tear on it, I have terrible boundaries with the church.
Right.
So it's definitely been wearing on me. So I think that's definitely an issue.
Yeah. So let's hang on to that. I want to come back to that, the toll. But Brian, talk about kind of your experience.
Yeah. I mean, I went from, I led worship at, CCU Chapel for 3 years. I mean, in a lot of ways, worship was always seen as leading worship, and a church service in and of itself was always seen as a performance. Like there was no difference between what I would see, going to a concert or going to a theater where you've got, banks of chairs facing a, raised platform where the people are performing.
Right.
Okay. That's what we do at church too. Right. So, and I think the thing is, the people that are coming to church, they sort of want that.
Yeah.
Like they want a performance.
Yeah. And they want to be compelling, right?
They want, and that they want the pastor to be compelling. They want the music to be good. They want, everyone to look nice or look like them, So we want that. And so there is this push and pull of someone who's on a platform to be like, okay, I am here and I am, in a way, I'm performing for these people, but I want to do it in an authentic way. I want to do it in a way that's engaging and where I am presenting at least a part of myself that is real. I think where I've gotten in trouble in the past is, you do tend to, you fall in love with that stage a little bit.
Yeah.
And this was my experience at the larger church. Should I just say it?
Everybody
knows.
Just say it.
When I worked at Flatirons.
Yeah. For our listeners, Flatirons is probably one of the two really big mega churches, at least in Denver Metro.
And one of the largest in the country.
Yeah. And granted, I was there before it was sort of the behemoth that it is now. I was there in sort of the growing up phase. Or as I used to tell people, I was there when Flatirons went through puberty.
And puberty does not look good on anybody.
Right. It was a very
knuckles.
Very odd. Hair was starting to pop out of places, and we're like, where did this come from? And so at first, it was, it was just the very first time that I led there. I wasn't on staff. I had just been asked to come in, lead worship as a guest. And I didn't have any qualms about just showing up and saying like, yeah, this is me. This is what I do. This is how I lead worship. And I was able to retain that for some time. But after a while, it does start to, the more kind of performance pressure that's put on you.
Yeah.
The idea that like, okay, so you did great this weekend. Now, how are you going to be that great or better next weekend?
Yeah.
And that starts to seep in, and that's where you start to say like, okay, so what are some old, like, kind of tricks that I can pull out of the bag? You're starting to evaluate, like, what did I do last week that everybody seemed to like? Am I going to be able to do that again this week? And then the next week and the next week and the next week. And so you start to go back to that bag of tricks. And I think that's where the inauthenticity starts to creep in, is when you start to make it formulaic. You start to say like, okay, they really liked it when I did this or that or the other. I mean, there were things that I was doing that I didn't even know that I was doing, that were eliciting, like an emotional response, from people. And our sound guy's wife was sitting like in the front row one Sunday, and I don't remember what song it was, but I had this moment where I sort of, step back from the mic and just kind of put my head down and made, that face that worship leaders make of like, this is really intense, and this spirit is moving in me. And she was like, she told me after the service, she was like, I just lost it because I saw how emotional you were getting. I didn't have the heart to tell her. I was stepping back from the microphone to burp. Like, and so it's,
Yes.
It's that kind of thing where it's like people see somebody on stage and they think like, okay, this person is in charge. They know what they're doing. And, they're being moved. That moves me. Yeah. And so there's this power that comes with it that I don't think any of us ever asked for, but it's there. Yeah. And so just to go back to the original question, like worship is like everything that we're doing on that stage is a performance. Like it always, I think it always has been. You look back at like the Old Testament, like all that stuff that they're doing, these beautiful structures that they're building, the garments that they're crafting, like, like they're standing up and they're singing these things and they're saying these prayers and they're doing these rituals. They are performing those things, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around it. Yeah. And so in that regard, yes. Do I think that God wants us to bring a beautiful performance to him when we come to those spaces in worship? Absolutely. Yeah. We've somehow combined that, unfortunately, with our culture's notion of what a beautiful performance is. Yeah. And so and that's where I think, again, a lot of that inauthenticity starts to creep in, and we're like, okay, how can I conjure something up here that's going to make somebody have that, have that sort of response that my friend's wife did, even though like I wasn't crying, I was burping, So yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. I do think that everything that we do when we stand on a stage is a performance, but it's how we offer it and how we are expressing it internally and personally in those moments that makes it authentic or inauthentic, and the response that we're trying to elicit. Yeah.
What just makes me always amazed and grateful for is that person, the sound engineer's wife, was having actually a real moment.
Yeah, wow. Absolutely.
A real experience. Yeah. And Brian was trying not to burp at the same time. Right. And so it was something else happening. A lot of other factors. And I'm just like, what is in that moment? Yeah. It's just amazing. And
I think that's what a lot of people lose sight of, especially in those bigger environments. One of the things when I worked at Flatirons is everybody, and still to this day, there are some people that I encounter who find out that I work there, right? And they want to know, like, what's the secret sauce? Yeah, like what's the thing that they're doing, right? Because we want to point at all these, like, well, it was the secular songs that we were doing to draw people in, or it was the lights, or it was the the great sound system, or whatever that was. The thing is you could ask the people who were coming, especially in some of those early days, like, what is it? Like, when did you realize that this was your home? And not every single one, but I would say 90% of the people that you ask, they would say, I don't know. The second I walked through the door, there was something about this place that seemed so real. And
Right.
so that there is something that's happening on another level before we played any of those songs and wowed us with all of our production and our
Right.
performance. Before we did any of those things, the Spirit was at work in that space.
Yeah.
Drawing and speaking to these people before any of that happened. And that's something that would frustrate me when we would spend hours in a planning meeting trying to figure out, okay, how do we, this transition has to be right on and this thing has to happen and all this kind of, it's like, whoa, wait a second. How many people are actually even noticing all that stuff?
Yeah.
Because we lose sight of that thing that's happening on that other level, or we'll make, we'll sort of, pay lip service to it, like, oh yes, we understand, like the Holy Spirit's at work, God's doing something here. Great. How are we going to make it? How are we going to make it awesome?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think, again, I come at this from a pastoral perspective where I think about, like, there's sometimes you preach a message and you're just like, boy, that was rough.
Yep.
And someone comes, you're like, oh man, Lauren really spoke to me. And you're just like, what are you talking about? Right.
Yeah.
But going back, I think it's interesting that you guys are highlighting kind of two aspects of this. Paul, you're speaking about kind of the toll that it can take.
Mm-hmm.
And then Brian, you kind of highlighted, at least as I heard it, falling in love with the stage. I think you guys should have on Chasing Sunday Chuck DeGroat, who's done some great work on narcissism in the church. Because certainly, I mean, that happens.
That connection, that would be awesome.
That happens on both sides, really. If we think about, again, someone, the preacher or the worship leader, so to speak, that can happen, I imagine, to both sides. Certainly we see it happening. But let's kind of dive in. So I've been reading a couple books here on this, and I can't remember both titles. One is called Stuck. Another, I think, is just Clergy Loneliness or something like that. But they both kind of touch on this issue of inauthenticity. And one quote here is that pastors must have the ability to express who they are. But then the authors kind of say it may not be in their own church. So what do you guys think of that, Paul? Because I know you're talking about kind of that toll.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that I was reading about again and again, these pastors like feeling the toll, being like, I'm not being who I am in church. I'm not being who I am.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that is a piece of it, is if they even feel like they can be like 90% of themselves at a church, they know that there is a chance that 10% is going to slip out and somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to hear it, or they're going to set it the wrong way or whatever. And then it could be a career ender, whatever it is. But so there is that's what's called psychological safety, right? That's what businesses talk about. When you don't feel like you have the safety to make mistakes, then you're going to be not at a place for long. Now, I believed, I had this thing in my head that was like, the church was going to be sort of like the place that would never hurt me, because it was like, it was, it was God's people and love was going to show and all this sort of thing. Now, it didn't last very long, but at the same time, there's like this dream, I guess, in my mind that's just hoping that this is going to be the case, when in actuality, if I don't settle, or not settle, if I don't accept, I guess, maybe settle or accept, the fact that I'm not going to have that, I'm not going to actually have the freedom or peace that I really want, because I'm living in the fantasy, you know? And so you just mentioning like, hey, you may not find your community at the place you work. That's not terrible. You can go to work. You can offer yourself as authentically as you can. Often Brian and I, we worship lead in a bunch of different churches. And often we'll go, what can I affirm here? Yeah. What can I say? Yeah, I love that. And what things do I just have to go like, that's okay. I'm not engaged in that. I'm not involved in that. It always makes me feel a little bit like I'm rationalizing or whatever. But at some point you make these decisions you've made the decision for yourself to be healthier. Yeah. You're just kind of like, but for me, I know I have to make this decision or else I'm going to be
I think that's a good distinction because, again, many of my listeners work again in mainline Protestant contexts, going to quote unquote liberal seminaries, and then working in like these older, rural mainline churches that the congregation is often very conservative. And it's kind of like this, like, whoa, how do I be myself when I can't like preach on social justice every week?
Right.
So Brian, I want to hear from you kind of about, not that you are a narcissist by any stretch.
Oh, trust me. We don't have to answer that question.
Probably am. I don't know.
No, you're not.
How do you advise someone who's like, man, I feel like if I'm being a performer here, I'm just like, I'm not being who I am, or I'm being self-aggrandizing. Like, I don't know if this is a great example, but like my wife has a good friend who's, interestingly enough, like followed me to like 2 different churches. And I remember like the first time she came to church with my wife, she's like, who is that person up there? Like referring to me, because she's like, he's such a different person on Sundays. Again, getting to your point you made a while back about like, we're all kind of performing, and I know like I need to bring another level of energy and enthusiasm and excitement to that Sunday morning experience, which my mainline friends are going to drive that. Hate that word, but
the experience.
Yeah, talk more about, can you be authentic and be performing?
Yeah, I think you can, but again, I think it comes at a cost, because not only, Paul was talking about kind of the exchange of energy that takes place when you're on a stage. So part of my story in leaving Flatirons includes, going through a divorce and, kind of taking a year off from at least full-time ministry in a church. And I helped out at several different churches as a, kind of contractor for a while. And I made the decision very early on, like I don't really have anything else to lose by being fully myself in front of these people. And, while working at Flatirons and doing the things that I did there did take, a tremendous amount of physical energy. I don't want to say it didn't take spiritual energy as well, or emotional energy, but what I got really good at there was, I'm going to show you, and I talked to a therapist about this, what I'm going to do is to sort of like bring you in just a little bit closer. So I'm going to just show you a little bit. Yeah. Like I'm going to show you a little bit of my heart. I'm going to crack the door open just a little bit and show you like, see, I'm a mess too. But before they get too close, I'm just going to slam it shut, and that takes a toll as well, because you're not being fully yourself for those people. And you're only giving away just a little tiny bit, and so you're sort of building the mystery with that's like, ooh, Brian's like us, but he's not like us, all that kind of stuff. That took its toll, on my married relationship. Absolutely. Because it's hard to differentiate between doing that from the stage and doing that in front of the people that you love, Yes, so next thing you know, it's like, okay, so I've learned how to do this really well, so I'll just do this with everybody. So I made the conscious decision after I left there, and it was going through just this train wreck of a period in my life where I just decided, like, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. Like the people that I stand in front of and lead are either going to get all of it or they're going to get none of it. And what I began to discover is that is incredibly liberating, but it's also exhausting in its own right, because any time, and not to get too like there's devil behind every corner type of talk, but like what I was finding is I'd get up in front of a congregation and I would lead worship that way. And not that I would get up and just vomit all my stuff, every single time that I led worship, but I was very open, like, hey, I'm going through a rough time right now. And the thing is like, just statistically, with what I was going through, half the people in that room were either going through it or will be going through it or had been through it at some point. And so it's like, there was an instant kind of connection there, and they felt it. I felt it, but I also felt that it opened those Mondays after those Sundays. I would feel so low.
Yeah.
Like I would feel like, why did I say all those things? Why did I open myself up in that way? And so it was a different sort of, I would always talk about, a lot of Monday mornings when I was leading worship in bigger churches, kind of that Monday morning hangover.
Yeah.
It was a different sort of experience. While one was like, I was physically and somewhat emotionally exhausted. I was emotionally and spiritually exhausted.
Wow.
Because I had spent all of this, like I'd poured it all out, and I was doing that like almost every week, and I was just so tired. And so I think that there's a risk in doing that. I'm meandering all over the place. In order for a pastor to be able to really get up on stage and be their authentic self, they have to know that they're safe. And I don't feel like the church is notorious for shooting its wounded.
I mean, again, sorry to cut you off there, but again, I'm thinking again in my context of like mainline pastors.
Sure.
Again, many mainline churches are older white.
Right.
A lot of folks coming out of seminary, at least in mainline contexts, are often non-white, non-male. May not be, may not identify what's the word on the binary, so to speak.
Sure, yeah.
So again, there's some great risks of
absolutely
showing up as your whole self there too.
Oh yeah.
So,
but there's like a currency. Just from my experience in the audience, I remember Brian, when you were releasing the album that you recorded, Begin Again. And I went to go see one of your shows, and you performed that song. It was that really vulnerable one. Do you know which song that was? I'm not joking.
Was it Drunk?
Drunk.
Okay.
It was that one. And it was different in that moment because he did what he just said he did. He was like, I'm really going to do it. And there's performance, but there's authenticity in it. And the audience just magnetized right to it. And me too. And I was like, and I know him, but I know he's good at what he does. And I can see this. And I also know as a performer too, I was like, oh, that cost him. Not going to have much left. And that's what in some respect, that's what we love about every performer that we see is that they've opened a vein and they've bled for us. And, but unfortunately, it creates a bit of a dysfunctional relationship between us and artists. Because then we start to expect it as consumers.
Yeah.
And even in church, it's like, then we start to expect it that what I'm going to get every week is somebody bleeding in front of me.
Right.
And the pastor's going like, that's what the job is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we wonder why they can't do it and why they're going through PTSD.
Right.
And why, I mean, of course they are.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and I do want to get back to what you were saying. I think, it is extremely difficult. And like I said, it takes some discernment. Like, I'm not saying that every place that I went, I just got up and led worship, with my heart just flayed open in front of everybody. It does take some discernment to know. Like if you're a pastor in a church and you know that you're walking into a room where everybody, like, they have their expectations of you and they have their expectation of what the service should be like. Yes, you do need to be discerning and not just walk in and say like, all right, jerks, like this is how it's going to be from now on. That's, my upcoming book, How to Kill a Church, in 1 week or less. But, so it takes some discernment on the part of the pastor and the leadership, but they also need to say, like, you also need to be willing to take some risks. Yeah. Because I guarantee that the people, like, we make a lot of assumptions when we stand on a stage in front of people, or when we start to lead a different church or we start to lead a congregation. People are probably more forgiving and more flexible than we give them credit for. Right. But they need to see that modeled and they need to trust you before they're going to follow you to that space.
Yeah. Trust.
And so I think that if you can start to establish trust, one, by sort of playing the game that they've come to expect to be played on a Sunday morning, which feels a little bit like
some
you're selling out. Yeah, it's going to take some performance on your part, but you can pepper in this, like, now this is how it's been, but this is where I feel like we could go.
Yeah.
You know, and this is where because all of us have these stories, and we all have these things, and so modeling that unwillingness to hide.
Yeah.
Because we're all coming to church and we all want to hide in some way, and so whether that's, I want to hide behind the sermon and say, like, well, that sermon didn't speak to me. It's like, well, what would have spoken to you, and would you actually have been willing to accept that? And so it's this idea of the leader has to model that authenticity and model what they want from the congregation. That sounds manipulative.
Yeah. No.
Model where they want this community to go and what they want that community to actually be.
Right.
I think that's super important, and doing it gently and lovingly.
Yeah.
Like my parents are coming out of a situation at their home church, the church that I grew up in. They hired a new pastor after 35 years of the same pastor. They hired a new guy, and and then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, like, this switch just flipped. And all of the changes that he wanted to enact, he was just railroading them all through, and now he's gone after I think 2 years.
Yep.
The church is left in this just horrible position. They don't know what they're financially. They're almost ruined, like all this kind of stuff. And it's all because I don't think were the changes that he wanted to enact good. I think so, for the most part.
Right.
Like, he wanted them to be a more, open their doors up to the community and all that kind of stuff, and be welcoming, and starting a food pantry and all that. Those are all good things.
Right.
But the way that he went about it was he just slammed it down and said, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
That's not good leadership. I think a good leader realizes and recognizes where their people are first, before telling them, like, where he wants them to go.
Yeah.
Sorry, him or her. Sorry. Let me be.
There we go.
Let me be more inclusive.
No, that's it.
Well, so a couple concepts I've come across recently that I think kind of speak to this challenge is, one, this idea of layered relationships, which for our listeners, just real quick, explain the term. It's basically like, I'm not going to share, or I'm going to share something with my wife I may not share with one of my good friends, and that I won't even approach, like, with someone in my congregation. I think this is a really, again, this is what's interesting about the different faith traditions, perhaps, Brian and Paul, is like mainline traditions are the clergy are really taught, like, don't be friends with the congregation, keep a real stiff, clear boundaries. Whereas, like, in evangelical spaces, at least as I see it, it's more like, hey, we're all friends, we're all buddies, like, let's go hang out.
Yeah. I was like, and come into my office and stay a little late. Obviously that's where those troubles
lead to that.
But that was something I didn't really hear ever, Lauren, until I started working with you at Mission Gathering. Yeah. And I was like, well, that actually sounds like a great idea. That's like, you guys have been doing this?
Yeah. You mean there can be space that exists between the people that...
So, like, this idea of a layered relationship, do you think, like, I think it makes sense. Do you think, like, I know it's sometimes hard for congregants, parishioners, whatever word we want to call the church folk, to understand, like, do you think that's something helpful for however the quote unquote performer is, the pastor, the worship leader, the liturgist, to think through maybe in those terms?
There's it's a quote by Adrienne Rich that we talk a lot about in my house. And she says something to the degree of, it's not that we have to know everything that we have to share, or that we have to share everything, or we have to share all the things with everybody, but we're always thinking about, but sort of like she's talking about hospitality, but I also think you could even broaden it out to, like, what even the goal of maybe gospel sharing or evangelism is that we're constantly expanding the boundaries of truth and of hope between us.
Mm-hmm.
But then it doesn't necessarily mean everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is another form of, well, it's just no boundaries. And again, another great woman, Brené Brown, when she says vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's another thing and that's was reinforcing why that seemed to be a great idea to have those relationships. It's funny how I know those things, but don't behave that way often in ministry. I still feel like I've got to let everybody know all the time. So it's a hard habit to break if you kind of came from that.
Yeah. This is hard for me too, because again, coming from a, strictly, well, not strictly, but mostly evangelical background.
Right.
It is like Jesus was friends with everybody that he,
Right.
that he came across. Like we should be the same. Like, so let's all dive in and be as close as we can to everybody all the time. I do think that there's some faults to, kind of that model of, the pastor shouldn't be friends or have close relationships with anybody in his congregation. Because I think that not only does that breed, sort of this disconnect between you and the people that you're leading, but it can also breed this, just huge isolation, which is just running rampant in ministry culture.
My next podcast. Thank you for plugging, Brian.
Oh, well, all right.
About isolation.
Well, they're going to be. Sorry,
that's all right.
Take your train
Tease
of thought,
it.
but yeah,
Tease it.
I literally have 2 books that I've been reading, going to get the authors on about clergy loneliness and isolation.
Right. Yeah, and that isolation, sort of like what Paul was saying, that can breed all kinds of unhealth.
Right.
Just look at the news. It's like, that leads to so many dangerous places for, and I feel like almost all of those are bred out of a place of isolation. And that's not exclusive to mainline churches.
No.
We see that happen in the evangelical church as well.
In this fascinating way, that you can be very gregarious, very extroverted, and still be profoundly lonely. This book, we were reading From Strength to Strength, Arthur Brooks, and he talks about how he was on this vacation with his son, and his son saw him texting on a boat, and he said, "Who are you texting?" He was like, "I was just texting a friend." And his son says, "Is that a real friend or a deal friend?" I was like, nailed. Nailed, because all of my friendships were ministry connected. And I was like, oh crap. And then I started going, I don't really have any friends of people I'm not working with, or people in this field. Like there's nobody who's not going to be threatened or who has any dog in that fight if I change my mind about God, or if I change my mind about a particular doctrine. They can just be my friend through that. That's what I'm thinking is, especially as people move into their mid-30s and then through middle age, it's hard to make friends.
Especially guys.
Guys, especially. So, I mean, that's what I was thinking about when you're saying that.
Yeah. No, and I don't think there's an easy answer to that, because it's just, maybe it's because I've just never done it well. Because I've never seen it modeled well, either, because I don't think anybody really knows how to do it.
That's right.
And so I do think that, again, maybe it's just it's a matter of discernment and letting that come into play and saying like, okay, like I know that with these people, with this group of people, I can only go, like, it's probably best if I only go this far with them. But with these people, I know that with Paul, like when I'm with Paul, and I have a very small group of friends that I know, I can, like, that's where I can go. I can do the deep dive. That's where I can share the really awful stuff. That's where I can really go. And so, and I know, like, even serving at New Denver, I'm getting to that place of knowing my culture and my community well enough. Like, okay, I know that with so and so, like they're probably not ready to hear all of that.
Yeah.
They're probably not ready to get, full unadulterated Brian, but I do know that like there's some members of my worship team or there's some people on staff. I know like, yes, they know me to their detriment. They know me well enough that I can be completely and fully myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's just finding that balance and being discerning about where you go, but to completely cut it off, that's where it becomes, I think, just really dangerous and unhealthy.
Yeah.
There has to be a level of connection, both with your congregation and with those close personal confidants. You just have to hold that in balance and be discerning about when and where you can offer that kind of openness to people.
So, an illustration here I came across recently that I think y'all will relate to is, again, they talked about this metaphor of being on stage, backstage, and then off stage completely. Mm-hmm. So, like, again, I think about this for myself. Like, so I'm an introvert, like 100% an introvert. Like, I like people, but I'd be happy reading books all day and being solo. I don't mind. Mm-hmm. Sunday mornings, I'm extrovert as I can be, especially when I'm out front or amidst the congregation. Yeah. Even when I'm like pre-service, I'm pumping my energy, like trying to rally around like who else is serving that day. Yeah. So backstage, but I know like Sunday afternoons, and this is perhaps sometimes conflict in my own household, is like I need that off stage. Mm-hmm. So you guys are doing something, I think, or I guess does that kind of metaphor or illustration resonate? And then B, one of the authors I read really advocated for that kind of like off stage group where you can be yourself. Yeah. For clergy, for pastors, it can really be like a clergy group. You guys are doing something I think that really resonates called the green room. Yeah. Why don't you talk about like how you envision that fitting into this kind of idea?
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely resonates with us. And it's definitely a lot of language that we use with worship leaders and creatives that we see. The green room is a part of a theater's design, and then has as churches continue to build, they start to build in green rooms, and a green room is traditionally where the cast is going to meet before the show. So they're not in their dressing rooms; they're just kind of in the green room. It's where meetings happen, but often on a tour or at a church. It's the place where you're not on stage, obviously, but you're close. You're stage adjacent. Yeah. So you're close, but you're not on stage. And it's typically what I've found is when the best conversations happen because you're working. The thing about a group, you get close with people you're working with, right? So you're working on a similar project or on a similar mission, but there's downtime. And in that downtime, you're talking about whatever you think, or you're laughing, right? Or you're just making jokes. And those are very powerful times for team building, for building long-term relationships. And so what we decided to do was make this group called the Green Room, which is really about coaching. It's helping people in their on-stage moments, when they're on stage with teams, when they're on stage literally in a church. But they also need the off-stage. Yeah. Now it's still not off-stage. Right. It really is in the building, because we're talking about how does it increase. But
you're encouraging people while they're in the green room, while they're quote unquote backstage. To get those off stage.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, it all kind of centers around this idea of kind of spiritual formation and taking time because I feel like those are two things that are in very short supply in modern worship ministry, just in modern ministry in general. Is that we have, a world of conferences and books and resources and online things that the people can go to for, a weekend or for, 3 or 4 days midweek. to kind of get your batteries recharged and find out some cool resources and find out what that, the cool big church down the street is doing and all that kind of stuff. And all of it is very practical, and all of it is designed to make, your Sunday morning service, look and feel and sound great, right, and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to spiritual formation or your spiritual health, that's, oh, by the way, there's a book for sale in the lobby about that. Or we'll have a breakout during lunch that you can go and talk to somebody about that. And so what you have and what we have seen is, worship leaders, pastors who are, they're able to pull off a great event, or a great experience, to make your listeners angry, a great experience on Sunday morning, but they go home on Monday and they just feel dead inside, and that can only happen for so long. Yeah. So we wanted to create a space for worship leaders in particular, to stop and actually find some care for their souls and walk through a process of spiritual formation that hopefully can help them recognize some of those unhealthy patterns of, trying to achieve something great for their church, right, and build their ministry or build their life that way. Or is it better if you find a space where you can rest in who you are in Christ and in the acceptance that he offers, and find out how your ministry can thrive in that way, as opposed to just trying and then hopefully cashing in your 403B someday. And, and
it's a real deep there, 403B clergy savings.
Yeah. Just a deep cut. Yeah. So that's really the heart behind the green room, is just create that space where they can actually be filled as opposed to constantly having to pour out. And that's where, I mean, Paul and I both had been in that place of, I was introduced to this concept of I think it's Bernard of Clairvaux who talks about like, we are to be reservoirs, not canals. Yeah. And a reservoir allows itself to be filled, before anything is sort of offloaded or, kind of poured out of it. As my model for ministry was, you're a canal. God will pour it into you. And then as soon as it's there, you're pouring it out into somebody else. Yeah. And that's just an exhausting way, not only to do ministry, but to do life. And we get to this place where we feel like, running on a quarter tank actually feels full, but we're just constantly filling it partially because we're always pouring it back out. Right. So, so we wanted to create this space for worship leaders, maybe someday for other people in ministry, worship leaders. That's who we know. That's what we are. Right. But I feel like this is something that so many in the church could benefit from, just because we can't continue this way, or we're going to continue to burn through people in ministry. Yeah. So
you named two things that I think that really speak to some of the challenges we talked about earlier. Is like time, like Paul, you talked about the toll. Brian, you talked about the toll and the cost. Like with that toll, with that cost, you need some time to kind of like recharge your batteries, and then you need some spiritual formation to not feel like you're just selling your soul every week. Yeah. Let me ask one more question, and then we'll take a break here. What advice do you have for pastors, like for non-musicians who are like, hey, I want to improve at my craft, but I don't want to feel like I'm just like out there performing?
Oh, like improve in the craft of
perform. Like, can it be both? Can I be authentic and performing kind of thing?
My recommendation is take an acting class.
Oh,
yeah, definitely. Because the thing about, as acting evolved like this, right?
Okay.
In Greek times, they spoke from behind a mask. That's where we get the word hypocrite. That's Hippocrates was the actor who spoke behind a mask. Then there was a chorus and everybody spoke. Then after that, the first actor with a solo line was Thespis. That's where we get the word thespian and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So as that continues to evolve, the actor is working on making like Shakespeare would say, like a mirror to nature. To Hamlet. Hamlet says, make yourself a mirror to nature. So you're less false and more your real self, but there is craft to it.
Interesting.
So it does require the same level of energy and all this stuff, but you begin to learn things about breath control, articulation. You think about how you make peace with the fact that you're just an authentic version of yourself. You're not your whole self there. So acting does a lot to help you understand that you're never in a monologue either. You're always in a scene with a bunch of other people. So it helps you contextualize what that event is. And to me, there's really no difference between what's happening in a theater and what's happening in a church service. They're all meant to elicit the same sort of changes in our brain, changes in our ethics and lifestyle. So that would be my, or at least a voice and diction class.
That's good. That's good. Brian, for you?
Yeah. I don't know if I have any like specific resources. I mean, yeah. And I had a thought in my head and then it just left as I thought about how smart Paul is. Hey-yo. I'm just so intimidated. I am. Yeah, I think, well, I will give a resource, a book that I read years ago by Larry Crabb called The Pressure's Off. That was hugely helpful for me in just like, you don't always have to be the guy or the gal that's on all the time.
Yeah.
Like it's okay for you to have, an off Sunday, it's okay. Like none of this is going to, like, the world's not going to end. Your church isn't going to, shutter its doors because you didn't exposit, Luke really well that day,
right.
So, try to take the pressure off yourself a little bit. And there can be ways that you can do that even within your service. This isn't as much of a problem, I feel like, in mainline churches, at least in evangelical churches, it is, where like the sermon is the high point.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the sermon is the thing.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way. Like lean into your team, lean into the people who are around you. Start to recognize some of the folks that are gifted within your community who can take some of that load off of you, who can help remove some of that pressure that you're feeling. And so that's, it's not as smart of an answer as Paul. But yeah, I mean, take the pressure off yourself and just rest in the fact that like you're already there. Like you're in your church.
Yeah.
Like this is where you are and it's fine.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the end of the world if you have one kind of off day.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm thinking of, before we wrap up here with a break, I'm just thinking of, you guys use the illustration of the green room, which again is being very foreign to some mainline folks, but in many mainline congregations that will have like a, what they call like a pastoral relations committee or a pastor parish committee or different acronyms, which I think could be like a quote unquote green room for pastors.
Sure.
Like a healthy one of those groups, like you're going to be a little bit more authentic, you're a little bit more honest.
Yeah.
And they can kind of help you advocate for when you're back, quote unquote, on stage or on chancel. Well, let's take a quick break. Again, my guests have been Brian Davis and Paul Romig-Leavitt. Let's come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Paul Romig-Leavitt and Brian Davis. So, guys, this has been some fabulous conversation here. For sake of time, let's make these quick hitters. So, Paul, you have to limit your brilliantness here.
Good Lord. What is it? Where am I?
Paul, you'll have to limit your brilliantness. Brian, just let it fly. It's fine.
Brian, try really hard.
Do your best, Brian. Just do your best.
God. Well, how about this? I'll let Brian go first.
There we go.
Brian,
Okay,
if you're Pope for a day.
I've been dreading this question.
What does that day look like? What do you want to do?
Oh,
I mean, you're wearing a hat right now, so you can
that's
decide
right.
you want to wear the
Here,
hat. Puff
There
it
you
up
go.
a little
It's
bit.
Pope hat.
Gosh, if I was Pope for a day, I have too many like pictures in my head from like watching the Da Vinci Code and like all those kinds of things. So it's like, I'd tell everybody all the secrets. Like I'd let it all. I just let it all out. Like ollie oxen free.
Yeah.
There you go. The library's open. Have at it.
There you go. That's
Paul?
good. I would sell all the art and most of the property, and I'm sure we'd have a couple of debts to settle.
Yeah.
So
Probably.
You'd both be heretics the next day for sure.
Absolutely.
Yep. I don't mind that.
Absolutely.
I'm a heretic now,
Yeah,
so I'm
right?
used to it.
Yeah.
Okay, a theologian or a Christian figure you want to meet or bring back to life.
I thought about this one a lot. Henry Nouwen was the one that came to mind for me. His writing is just so gentle and just so like I just feel like I'm being like just hugged by an old friend when I read his writing.
Yeah.
And so that would be mine.
It's a good
That's
one.
good. I probably James Baldwin for me.
James Baldwin. Yeah. It's good. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Does it have to be good things
No.
that they remember?
No.
I think they'll remember how we reacted or didn't react and respond to a lot of the current cultural and societal upheaval that's been happening. I don't know if we'll be looked back upon positively, unfortunately.
Actually, I think this might be the time where everybody will see, okay, that's where they couldn't pretend anymore. That's where they couldn't hide anymore.
Yours is like, that's good. That's so, mine is like, everybody's going to look back and see how bad we sucked during this time.
No, but it is that way because it's just like, oh my gosh, everything is on fire.
Yeah.
Everything is dark.
Yeah.
I don't know. At moment by moment, I'm thinking, and this is like we're recording this in election season,
Right.
And so
7 days,
in
something like that.
7 days. But I was reminded of a very nice and hopeful way to think about it. It's like when it's not things are breaking down. Grief is the first step of creation.
Yeah.
So it is actually in this stuff where things are actually being owned up. And we can't see it. I hope that's the case, that we don't just go back and think this was an anomaly. This could actually be where things change.
Very hopeful.
So,
Very hopeful. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
I hope that we can find a better way to engage with our political systems, at least in America, a healthier way, a more hopeful way, a more Christ-centered way to engage in that conversation. That's probably one of the things that scares me the most about where the church is at right now on both ends of, kind of the political spectrum, left and right. There's got to be, I feel like Jesus almost always engaged us in the middle and above, not on this like linear plane that we seem to like playing on so much. So that's I'm hopeful that we can find a way to engage in those conversations in a more Christ-centered and Christ-focused way.
I know this sounds crazy when I say it, but I truly mean this. I really hope for the end of Christendom. And that doesn't mean I hope for the end of the church. I don't see them as the same thing. I think Christendom is I think it's one of those principalities and powers maybe Paul was talking about. Like, I want it gone. I want something that's like more of an embodied faith. I hope more mothers are leading and less fathers are leading the church, more living with marginalized people from the obscurity and not in the spotlight. And and then I think I would be happy if everything looked a little bit more like Father Greg Boyle's Homeboy Industries, and that's what we had for the church. That's what I'd like.
Well, usually like the most hot take of those answers is like abolish the papacy. Ending Christendom. That's pretty.
You just went straight for the jugular. Yeah.
That's good.
Got us some good thinkers, but other than that, give us a lot of garbage.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, reclaim. The church needs to reclaim its place on the fringes. I think is I would add to that, Paul.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
That's good. Where can folks find out more about you and connect with you? Green Room, all that.
Yeah, they can find out more about our ministry at torncurtainarts.org. And if you are a worship leader listening to this, or you're a pastor and you think your worship leader could benefit from it, greenroomleaders.com. They can find out more about that there.
Yeah.
I hate doing this. Paul mentioned my music.
Yes.
You can find, you can listen to some of that, on Spotify. If you search the Brian Davis Band, if you just search Brian Davis, you come across a country artist whose songs include One Good Beer and Get Plowed. So that is not me. Search the Brian Davis Band.
We've got to be on the next album. You've just got to do it. So people don't know.
These songs. So anyway, the Brian Davis Band on Spotify, Apple Music, all those places, and you can listen to some of that there. But yeah.
Yeah. I all the things that Brian said, and I've also got a new site called paulromig-leavitt.com.
Whoa.
I put a paulromig-leavitt.com. I just finished it. It's just a resume, and then I'm starting to put my old blogs on there too, because I'm writing a lot now,
which are brilliant. Yeah.
All right, well, guys, this is the first time again I get to in person leave someone with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Leavitt. Thanks, and go in peace.